Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. You're walking down a busy city street, maybe you're heading to work, grabbing a quick coffee, and then bam, suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, you are hit with it. That unmistakable, heavy, intensely pungent odor. It's super sharp, it lingers in the air, and it instantly commands your complete attention. You know exactly what it is. And, if you're like most people, an incredibly common question immediately pops into your head. The smell is just so intense that you can't help but wonder, wait, is this actually getting me high right now? Is just breathing in this skunky air harming my health? And hey, that is a completely valid reaction, right? Your senses are basically being overwhelmed. So today, we're going to answer that exact question. We'll dive into the hard science of what's actually floating around in the air, how our brains are processing it, and exactly where we draw the line between a harmless odor and a real health risk. All right, section 1, that distinct skunky smell. Okay, so to really understand the health impact here, we first have to unpack the chemistry of the smell itself. The odor of marijuana is actually this wildly complex mix of two distinct chemical families. On one side, we have terpenes. Now, these are highly volatile natural plant compounds that give off really pleasant aromas. Think of limonene, which gives off a nice citrusy smell, or piney, which smells just like a fresh pine forest. Honestly, if marijuana only had terpenes, it would just smell like a lovely mix of lemons and pine needles. But then we have the other side. Volatile sulfur compounds, or VSCs. These are the heavy hitters. They're the ones responsible for those pungent, stinging odors, the kind you find in garlic, rotten eggs, and yeah, actual skunks. So when you smell that strong street odor, you're really smelling this specific, incredibly potent combination. Moving right along to section 2, the science of the scent. So why does the skunky side of that chemical equation just completely take over? Let's look at why our brains react so aggressively to this specific smell. Well, recent research has actually isolated the exact molecule responsible for that overpowering stench. It's called 3-methyl-2-butene-1-thiol, or let's just call it 321-MBT for short. This is a volatile sulfur compound that is chemically in the literal exact same family as a skunk's defensive spray. It's not just a similar vibe, it is structurally related. And to make matters worse, when the plant is heated up to, say, 600 or 900 degrees Celsius during smoking, these volatile molecules are released into the air in massive, highly concentrated quantities right alongside the smoke. But still, why does it hit us so hard from like a whole block away? Well, it all comes down to a truly staggering number, 1 in a billion. You see, our evolutionary biology hardwired our human noses to detect these specific sulfur molecules at parts per billion, or honestly, even parts per trillion levels. Why? Because historically speaking, out in the wild, sulfur signals decay, rotting food, or the presence of a dangerous predator. So your brain is literally evolved to sound a massive alarm the second a single molecule of this stuff enters your airway. You smell it so intensely because your body is instinctively screaming danger, even if the source itself is just a plant burning down the street. Which brings us to section 3, how THC actually works. Now that we know why the smell is so alarming to us, let's separate that scent from the actual psychoactive effects. We need to look at how the brain actually gets high. To feel any intoxicating effect whatsoever, or to ever form a chemical addiction, a completely different molecule, tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, must physically enter your bloodstream, travel up to your brain, and bind to something called the CB1 receptor. You can think of the CB1 receptor as a regulatory switch sitting in your brain's reward system. It's basically just waiting for a very specific physical key to turn it. And here is the exact loop that causes intoxication and for some users eventually leads to addiction. Step 1, THC physically enters the brain. Step 2, it finds and binds to those CB1 receptors we just talked about. Now step 3 is the absolutely crucial part. It inhibits GABA. GABA is essentially your brain's natural braking system. So when those brakes get completely turned off, we hit step 4. A massive flood of dopamine rushes straight into the brain's reward center, the nucleus accumbens. And finally, step 5. The brain records a really powerful memory of this reward, basically teaching the body to crave it. The takeaway here, this is a heavy, physical, chemical process, and it requires a significant dose of THC to happen. Let's move to section 4, smell versus secondhand smoke. This brings us to honestly the most critical distinction in our entire explainer, understanding the fundamental difference between an odor and a drug. The crucial point you need to take away is this. Odor molecules are not THC. Those molecules making you wrinkle your nose on the street, those skunky sulfur compounds and citrusy terpenes, they literally do not contain the psychoactive drug. Smelling them absolutely does not mean you are inhaling a dose of THC. They are two completely different chemical components that just happen to be floating in the air at the same time. So when we break down the risk based on your environment, things get really clear. In the green zone, like an open street, you are encountering odor molecules only. The risk of getting high or addicted, it is mathematically zero. It's just way too highly diluted. Now in the yellow zone, say a moderately enclosed space like an apartment hallway, you're getting dissipated smoke. The risk here is still low, mostly just limited to mild eye or maybe throat irritation. But the red zone, like a hot-boxed car or a tiny, unventilated room where someone is actively smoking, that brings dense smoke and measurable THC. Think of it like a coffee shop. It's exactly like smelling coffee roasting. You get that amazing, rich aroma in the green zone, but you definitely don't get the caffeine hit unless you're actually sitting down and drinking the cup in the red zone.
All right, Section 5, the real health risks.
Let's evaluate what happens when you do crossover from simply smelling an odor on the street into that red zone of actual dense secondhand smoke. In a totally unventilated space, you're no longer just smelling those VSCs, you're actively inhaling combustion particles and trace amounts of THC. This exposure can actually cause a mild contact high, leading to stuff like dizziness or sleepiness. It can even leave trace amounts of THC detectable in your blood or urine. But the real physical harm comes from the smoke itself, inhaling fine particulate matter known as PM2.5 alongside carbon monoxide. This presents genuine respiratory irritation, and it carries significantly increased health risks for vulnerable groups like kids, pregnant women, and folks with asthma. But bringing it right back to our primary question, if you are a non-user simply catching a whiff on the breeze, the smell alone physically cannot cause addiction. Now sure, while that skunky odor might act as a psychological trigger or a craving cue for someone who already uses the drug and has that reward memory built in, it literally cannot hijack the dopamine reward system of a non-user. It just doesn't work that way. So the next time you're walking down the street and get hit by that massive wave of skunky scent, you can rest totally easy knowing you aren't getting high and your lungs aren't in any danger. But it does leave us with a pretty fascinating final thought, doesn't it? Isn't it incredible that our brains are hardwired by millions of years of evolution to react with such intense, visceral disgust to an odor that, in that moment, poses absolutely zero physical danger to us? It's literally just a harmless plant molecule floating by, but your ancient survival instincts are screaming, "Watch out!" Well, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking great questions about the world around you.